Hi, welcome to my channel. We're going to walk through my Neovim configuration line by line as a front-end engineer, and hopefully this helps you, or you might be able to identify things in my config that you can help me with. So first of all, what is Neovim? It's a hyper-extensible Vim-based text editor. The configuration is written in the Lua programming language. Let's get into it, I guess. So I'll go over to my terminal and show you the version of Neovim that I'm running. It's a head version that I've installed via Brew on my Mac. I believe there'll be a newer version since, but basically this is the 0.9 branch of Neovim. Some other quick answers to some of your questions that you might have is, what terminal am I using? I'm currently trying out Wes's terminal emulator. It's a GPU accelerated cross-platform terminal emulator and multiplexer written by Wes, just one person, and it's implemented in Rust. I quite like it. I've previously used iTerm. I don't see myself going back as yet. If you want to see my config, you can view it all on GitHub, daneharnett/.files, and Neovim is here in the nvim.config nvim subfolder. I have my configuration for various other programs as well in here. Links to all of these things will be in the description, so you can grab them down there. Here I am in my .files project, checked out, and I've browsed through to the Neovim configuration folder, so that when we open Neovim, we'll be directly in that folder as our root folder. First thing I want to do is give you a bit of an overview of the folder structure and the files that are in there. So I'll open up the tree view, and we'll just bring that over a bit further like that, so you can see everything when we expand it. As you can see, in the root directory of this config folder, I've got an Editorconfig file. This allows me to set standards for indent size, which is 4 spaces. Gitignore file, Lua RC file. Because the config is written in Lua, I have this file that defines the runtime version and whether we should check the third party. Otherwise, I get a prompt asking for this information every time we start the Lua language server. We have the init.lua file, which is the entry point to the configuration. We have a lazy lock JSON. So this is the locked versions of all of the plugins that I've installed for Neovim. I'm using the lazy plugin manager for managing my plugins. We'll get to that in a moment. I have a style Lua toml configuration file, and this allows me to have formatting on save for Lua files. And I have a to-do markdown file that I just keep a list of things, if I think of them, that I want to add or investigate or explore in my config. It's not very long at the moment, just a couple of items in there at the moment. Let's go to the init.lua. So when we load Neovim, the first file that it will run for configuration is this file here. So if we go in there, we can see that I've just got some comments here. My config is inspired by at least these 3 people. So Brian Kegley, Chris at Machine, and TJ. And many, many others who have shared their knowledge on YouTube, on Twitch, and in GitHub, and there's just too many to list. First thing that we do is just import in my personal configuration. So if we have a look at the file tree again, I've got a daneharnett folder in Lua. And so by requiring daneharnett, what it does is it looks inside this Lua file for a module called daneharnett. It didn't find a module called daneharnett.lua, but it found a folder that has inside of it a whole heap of stuff. And one of the files inside of there is init.lua. So that is the module that it will pull in. So as you can see, I just have a whole heap of files inside the daneharnett directory. All of these will be imported and used at some point, and maybe some of them are not used and they're kind of like orphaned. I believe all of them are used. I guess I should call out that my configuration is set up for me as a front-end developer. So working in TypeScript, React, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Those are things that I use this for. But I also have to have it configured for Lua, because as you'll notice, if you adopt Neovim, then you'll probably be writing your configuration in Lua, and so you want your editor to be configured for Lua so that you can have a nice experience using it to edit those Lua config files. I think I have some other like configuration for Rust and maybe some other programming languages that I have experimented with, but I haven't used them that much, and so I can't really endorse that just yet. But because I have it configured for Lua correctly, I can use the go to definition on this module name, and it will open that file directly for us. Let's start with this init.lua. So this is the first thing that Neovim loads as part of my configuration. Let's walk through this line by line. First, we define a local variable for Vim. I don't actually know why I'm doing this, but this was done in one of those other inspired configurations, so I have it. I feel like everything would still work if we didn't have this, and potentially we can look at removing it at some point. We define the leader key. So if you're familiar with Vim, you can have when you map keystrokes or keybinds or key mappings to various commands, one special one is leader, and I have that mapped to just the space key. So any of my leader commands are space. The second thing I do is disable the net-rw, which is like the built-in file explorer that's in Vim. And I'm doing that because I'm using a plugin called nvim-tree. Basically, in their configuration, they strongly advise that we disable this as early as possible in our config, so it lives here. You'll notice that in my other plugins that the configs are all separated in another way. This one is, I guess, a bit special here, and I just thought of a way to refactor this, so I might do that later. But anyway, we're running this here as early as possible. Also, we want to set the terminal GUI colors to true as early as possible before the plugins load as well. Okay, so now I have a conditional here, which is if we're not in VS Code. So there is a way to run Neovim as a backend to VS Code. And so there's a plugin, the Neovim plugin for VS Code, and I was experimenting with that at one point. Because VS Code provides a whole heap of functionality itself, you kind of don't want to run and configure and set up Neovim in a way that conflicts with VS Code. So basically I have some configuration that is turned off for VS Code. I don't load any of my plugins inside VS Code. So the options are loaded second. So these are various like configuration options for Neovim or key mappings or customization that are not really directly mapped to plugins. So I just have one file for each, and we import them all here and get them to execute. And then we have some other configurations that we don't want to run in VS Code. So these are configurations that will run anytime Neovim is used. And then these are some configurations that are excluded from Neovim. Those navigation and another command palette one, which we can talk about a bit later. So let's go into the plugins module. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm using a plugin manager called Lazy. And if I jump to the bottom of this file, because that's where the specific like lazy configuration is right here. Basically, this is the snippet of code that the Lazy plugin manager says to put into your config. And then right at the bottom, we call require lazy setup, and we pass in this plugins variable. And this plugins variable is a table that I've defined at the top of the file, local plugins right here. Let's just walk through the list of plugins and the various configs that I have for each one. First of all, we load nvim-Treesitter. So Treesitter is a nice way to get more information about your code. So it kind of like passes the source tree into a abstract syntax tree, and then you can do lots of other stuff with it, like generate completion suggestions, get more what would you call it, higher resolution syntax highlighting, get context of where you are in the file, you'll notice that my lazy plugin tree kind of has a standard format. This is the lazy plugin format that they require these plugin definitions to be in. I have also tried to keep my configuration standardized. So first thing we have is the name of the plugin, and then I have the commit. So I've pegged each of the plugins to a specific commit. And the reason why I do this is because when I'm installing and configuring Neovim across machines, I want to know that this config has been tested and all of these plugins have been tested together. So I actually specify a commit for every single one. And when I decide it's time to upgrade, I'll upgrade them not together and not one by one, but I'll upgrade the ones that are related to each other. And I'll then test them and make sure that everything still works before I commit it, so that I know that if I install on another computer, this is a working configuration. Another thing that I have is an init function. And generally the init function just requires one of my module files and calls the init method on that module. Now I have basically a treesitter.lua file in the daneharnett folder, and that file defines an init method, and that has all of the configuration for starting up my Treesitter configuration. There'll be other keys that are in this map later on in the file, and we'll talk about them when we get to them. So let's go into the Treesitter init function. So we see at the top, we define the module, and then we add a method to it for init. This function is called once the Treesitter plugin has been loaded. Okay, so we go and get the Treesitter configs module and we call setup on it. And basically we just say, make sure that we have the Treesitter definitions installed for Bash, CSS, HTML, Java, JavaScript, JSON, Lua, Markdown, TSX or TypeScript with React, and TypeScript. Let's have syntax highlighting. Let's have syntax indentation provided by Treesitter as well, and also allow the playground. So there's another plugin that we can run that will give us like a way to explore the abstract syntax trees. I don't really use it too much. Update time, as I said, I don't really use this too much, but I assume that this is just a timer on how often the playground gets updated as the code is changed in one of the other tabs. Okay, coming down a bit, you'll also notice that in some of my configs, I have this structure where I run this function pcall. I think it's protected call. Call this function require with these arguments. If that successfully runs, then the context status OK will be true. And if it doesn't successfully run, it will be false or falsy. I don't really remember. And the module that is being imported is provided as the second return value. So then we check to see if that pcall was successful. If it was, then we can call the setup function on tsContext. So Treesitter context, this line here, where we are now, because we're inside the init function, if we scroll down and the line 3 is where function init is defined. If we keep scrolling down and line 3 goes off the screen, it actually keeps that at the top here, so we know we're in the init function. This would be more helpful when we're in deeply nested modules or functions. Okay, so that's Treesitter context. The next part here is I have configured Treesitter to provide fold data to Neovim so that we can expand and collapse various blocks using Treesitter. So this file I don't think is providing us with any blocks. Maybe when we find another file we can then use it. But basically what this is doing is allowing us to like use the Treesitter abstract syntax tree to be able to collapse and expand blocks of code. You might have noticed in VS Code, like on the left hand side, you have a little plus minus that you can collapse up various blocks. so that you don't see them within your view. And then basically all of this stuff is just like related to this folds with Treesitter. It's just going through the syntax tree for whether the file is a supported file, and then setting this command to enable those folding capabilities. So that is Treesitter. And then I'm using an additional plugin for Treesitter called Completion that will give us completion suggestions. There's the Treesitter context, which was used up above, and then the playground, which I mentioned as well. The next thing I have, and I guess it might be worth mentioning the order of these things. They're not in any like very sort of strictly adhered to order. So they're just in the order that I put them in the file, really. So nvim-biscuits is a great plugin from fellow Twitch streamer CM Griffing, which gives us the ability to see some, which we don't see it here. Let's maybe jump back. Maybe it's not enabled in Lua, potentially. Basically, what nvim-biscuits gives us is some virtual text at the end of a block definition, whether it's a function or an object that we've defined, and it gives us the context of what that object is or what that function is, so that we can, if it's longer than a page worth of text, we can know where we are when we're at the end of that thing. So I have nvim-biscuits installed. It's at this commit. Cond is the condition to be applied to this plugin, and as you saw before, I actually don't load any of these plugins in VS Code, so this is probably not required. But yeah, basically this condition is just saying don't run this when we're in VS Code. And here's the init function. Let's jump into the init function. Again, we have our protected call to require. If we successfully load nvim-biscuits, we call the setup function with my only piece of custom configuration, which is cursor line only. And we can see here, this is an nvim-biscuit virtual text. So we can see that for some reason, it's detecting that this end of this block is this here. So this seems like it's a bug, but maybe this one's not a bug, right? This is telling us that we're in the end of the function m.init, which is this line here. So that's nvim-biscuits. Let's scroll down a bit further. A collection of language packs for Vim. So that's vim-polyglot, basically just giving us some more language support in Vim. The next thing is my theme or color scheme. So I'm using catppuccin nvim. This commit, don't load it in VS Code, and here's my custom configuration. I'm using the mocha flavor. We call setup, and then we tell Vim to run the command color scheme catppuccin, and that will give us the color scheme and syntax highlighting that you see in my configuration. Next thing I have is bufferline. So bufferline is the top of buffer, so it's this section up here where it's displaying these tab-like things. This is using a different kind of version pegging. It's pegging to a specific tag at 2.8.2 versus a specific commit. Let's jump into the actual configuration. We can see there's a lot. Again, protected call so that we don't fail if this plugin is not installed for whatever reason. And then we call bufferline setup. Now, if we just have a look here, I'm pretty sure that I did not define all of this config. So my guess here is that I've copied this from somewhere else, and I don't really know all the details of each of these things. So yeah, I would recommend going to bufferline page and reading about the config. I have no numbers. I don't know what no numbers means. Maybe it puts a number up here next to each one. The command for closing, I don't have a way to close anything here. It looks like if you right click on it on a thing, it will like delete the buffer or close the buffer. Left mouse will select that buffer, so we can see that here. Middle mouse does nothing. Indicators, we can see there's a little like line just here. That's that. Something to do with icon. I guess that's saying that we display this icon here. These are the different icons used for the different states of each of the buffers. If we have more buffers that can fit in the line at the top, we get these little left-right arrows displayed on each end. Max name length, max prefix length, size of the tab. I'm guessing this is saying that this is like 21 characters long. Diagnostics equals false. I wonder if I kind of want that, and I'm not sure what this would do, but I'm curious now. If I turn it to true, I'm assuming that we'll see like the status of the diagnostics in the buffer. So if there's like a syntax error, we'll actually see that in the buffer tab at the top. So let's skip over the rest of this stuff here. Offsets, I don't know. I guess what this is saying is if there is a nvim-tree, then the tab line goes to here instead of all the way across. I think that's what that's saying. Show buffer icons, show buffer close icons, false. So yeah, if I had that true, there would be a close thing up here, and potentially if you click on it, it would close the thing. Show tab indicators is true. I don't know what it does without. Sorted buffers, don't know if I've used this or not. Separator style is thin, which I think is this. Oh, actually it's there, very hard to see, but I think it's just a single pixel line in between each of the tabs. Enforce regular tabs, don't know what it does. Always show buffer line, true. I guess that just means that if there are no buffers open, that it will still have that sort of reserved there. Okay, so that's buffer line. Next we have lualine, which is the bottom of the buffer. So down here, normal, plugins, and some other stuff on the right hand side. I'll just hide the camera for a second so you can see that. You can see UTF-8, little penguin. I'm guessing this is line endings. Then the file type of this file, how far down we are the file. So this line is 19% down, and then 5826. This is the line and character that we're at. So that's lualine at the bottom there. Again, we're pegged at this commit. This one has an additional dependency, which we can see here, which is the web dev icons. So let's jump into the init function for lualine. Just a very simple config. Basically, I've just told it to not apply the lualine to nvim-tree buffers. So you can see down here, there is no lualine down here inside this buffer. That's all that we have there. Let's go down to lspconfig. So yeah, I have a local variable with the nvim lspconfig commit because I've applied this in multiple places, because I've set it as a dependency for another module. I'm not sure if this is good or bad or what, or whether I should be like defining a whole tree of dependencies for these plugins. That's what I've done, and it currently works, and open to hear suggestions on what might be a better way to organize all of this. Let's just talk through the dependencies of lspconfig. So Mason is a plugin to allow installation of language server protocol servers easily, and then Mason lspconfig basically connects nvim lspconfig to Mason. Comment.nvim lsp effectively connects the lsp server to the completion engine, and Fidget is like a notification plugin to display notifications at the bottom right of the screen. So what I'll do is I will turn the camera off, and then we'll jump into this init folder, and you should see at the bottom right corner of the window, you should see it loading the Lua LSP for that file. So let's jump in there. So yeah, there we go. Down there you can see Sumneko Lua has fully loaded, and you saw some other loading info there before. So that's Fidget. First thing I do is actually load in two files, two of my own config files. So Lspsaga and Trouble. And I guess we'll come back to them, but they're modules, separate modules. We've stored them there to be used later. Then we do a whole heap of protected calls to other modules and bailing out of this config if any of these are not available. We call Mason setup to configure it, and then we call Mason lspconfig setup and tell it the language servers that we want installed. So as I mentioned, I'm a front-end dev, so I've explored Deno as a JavaScript TypeScript runtime. JSON LS is a language server for running on JSON files. Rust Analyzer is a language server for Rust. Sumneko.lua is a language server for Lua, and we need that for configuring our Neovim. And then TS server, which is the TypeScript language server. Okay, the next thing we do is client capabilities. We basically talk to Vim and say, like, what capabilities do you have that we can tell the server about? We add on the capabilities of completion to those, and now we have this capabilities. We define this load diagnostics function. This function is called later on when LSPs are attached to a buffer. We just set these couple of global variables for Vim. So enable virtual text and insert delay are set to 1. I don't know what 1 means, and we could probably check that in the help. I've configured it so that we have these signs that are displayed when we have a diagnostic error. So for example, if I just if I make an error right here, I just say local, and we can see there's a little diagnostic icon here, which is telling us that this line is currently in error. And we can see that a name is expected, and this is not a valid Lua line. So yeah, configure those as signs to be configured on the left-hand side, and then some more config that we need to pass into Vim. So turn virtual text off, have some signs, and some other config that I don't really know exactly all the details of what they mean. Here's the onAttach function. So when a language server is attached to a buffer, I call this function, right? So my LSP is the module that we imported up above, and my trouble is a module that we imported up above. And basically I have a method on that module that attaches key maps to the buffer. So on attached to this buffer number, we attach these key maps to the buffer. And we attach these trouble key maps to the buffer. We call a load diagnostics function, which is defined up here, as I mentioned before. And specifically some custom configuration for TypeScript server, in that I want to turn the formatting off for TypeScript. The reason why I do that is because I want to use Prettier to format instead of TypeScript server. And when I say Prettier, I mean Prettier itself or ESLint Prettier plugin if the project uses ESLint. So let's jump into this attach key maps to buffer for Lspsaga. So here's the function defined here. Lspsaga is another plugin that we'll get to in a moment, but it basically gives us additional integrations to the LSP and I guess like more visual display of the LSP information. There's a thing called LSP Finder. So basically if I press GH, that'll bring up the LSP Finder. So I guess if I just I don't know if it requires something to be hovered on, but if I press GH, there we go. This is the LSP Finder. So this is Lspsaga integrating with the language server that's connected to this buffer. And I press Q to get out of that. And then we've got leader CA. So leader, if you remember from earlier, is space. So space CA will execute code actions. So if there's a code action available on a line, see a little light bulb on the left-hand side. And we can do leader CA to see what those code actions are and potentially execute them. Capital K is hoverdoc. So capital K, it's a hoverdoc, tells us that buffer key map takes a buffer number, a mode, a key, and a result. I won't go into all the details of all of these things, but basically these are mostly supported by Lspsaga, and you can look up the details of all the different the different options that are available with Lspsaga. So like, can jump into maybe this one, GP, peak definition, right? This opens a little floating window of the file that defines buffer key map, so we can actually see what does it do. There you go. I do want to call out specifically this section here where I've created an auto group called show diagnostics on hover. So when the cursor hold event occurs on the buffer that we're connected to, call the command lspsaga show line diagnostics. So that was again when we had like a diagnostic on the line. When you move the cursor onto the line and hold it there, it calls the lspsaga show line diagnostics, so it pops it up so you can see what the problem is there. Let's go back to here. Let's have a look at the key maps for trouble. Leader GR will do trouble toggle LSP references. So let's do leader GR and see what it does. So trouble is popping up this window at the bottom with all of the references to the buffer key map function, and we can actually, like, you know, move through the file there, and we can get rid of that. And trouble's another plugin that we actually have installed a bit later on. The next thing I have is a definition or a setup for each of the different language servers that we have. So again, we pass in the capabilities that we created at the top, and then what file types we want TS server to apply to. So I'm not sure if there are a default for this, but this is what I have it set to. I think this is so that it doesn't apply to JavaScript files. I just want it to apply to TypeScript files only. Some specific configuration options that I want to set TS server to. So maximum memory of 12 gigabytes and import module specify preference to relative. Pass in the onAttach function that was defined above so that when a buffer is attached to the TypeScript server, it runs that. How do we determine what the root directory is for a TypeScript server? And I have this custom configuration because I want my TypeScript server to only apply to the very top directory in my project, because I sometimes use it in mono repos, and I don't want to have multiple processes of this TypeScript server that's going to have potentially up to 12 gigabytes of memory. So basically I look for the .git folder and the folder that has tsconfig JSON. And if it has both of those, then that is a TS server root directory. Deno, nothing really to explain here, just configured the Deno server. JSON ls, so as I mentioned, this is the JSON language server that we have configured for file types that are JSON or JSON-C. JSON-C is JSON with comments. And these are some specific settings for the JSON language server. So what I've done is passed in some links to JSON schema store, which will allow, I guess, the language server to know more about the configuration files. Yeah, so like if you have an ESLint RC file or ESLint JSON file, and they are JSON, it can look at this schema and know what keys are available to be used in that configuration file. Coming down further, we're now at Lua. So we're configuring the Sumneco Lua server. These are just some settings for that. I don't really know exactly what they do. And then again, I mentioned I have some languages that I'm experimenting with. So I have a Rust one here as well. And this one is slightly different in that I've configured formatting for the Rust server specifically here and not in the onAttach, because as I mentioned in TypeScript server, I want ESLint and Prettier to format files. In Rust, I'm guessing I want the language server to format the files, and in Lua, I want style Lua to format the files, which we'll come to in a moment. And then there's setting up of Fidget, which is the notification bottom right of the whoops. Yeah, invalid range, yeah. So go over to here, let's close these, and we're back here. So that was LSP. The next thing we have is null-ls. So null-ls depends on Mason null-ls. So again, Mason is a plugin that will make it easier to install language servers. Null-ls is a way to connect programs that are not language servers to the language server protocol. For example, ESLint and Prettier are not language servers, but we can use null-ls to connect the functionality that they do have to LSP. Mason null-ls will help us install those language servers and make them available to Neovim. Here's my init config for null-ls. We have a heap of protected calls to make sure that those plugins are available. We grab the formatting module of null-ls and the diagnostics module of null-ls. I want to skip over this part just here and go down. We'll talk about the top part in a second. We'll get to the null-ls setup. So these are the configuration options for null-ls. So this is what the format, I guess, will be of the diagnostics that are displayed in null-ls. Debug true, I can probably change that back to false. I think I was testing some stuff. On attach, so again, this is kind of like the on attach function for LSP, but this is when a null-ls source is attached to a buffer. I want to configure LSP formatting. So basically, before a buffer is written, call this function. So this is effectively my configuration for format on save. And then these are the sources that I've configured for null-ls. So ESLint_d, which is like a persistent daemon version of ESLint. Part of the slowness of ESLint is the starting up of ESLint. So if you have a daemon started up already for your project, then when you send it like a file to be linted or formatted, it doesn't have to do the startup part, so it's a bit faster. I have a condition, so only use this diagnostic for things that are an ESLint project. We'll come back to that. I think timeout -1 is just unlimited timeout. Deno format, so this is a formatting source. So ESLint is my only diagnostic source that I've got configured through null-ls. The rest are formatting. So Deno format, if it's a Deno project, then do a format on save with Deno format, or configure vim.lsp.buff.format, this function here. It will run it. Prettier D, so again, it's a Prettier that is running as a daemon. It's a lot faster than starting Prettier up by default. And we have a condition here, should format with Prettier. This is a function. Is Deno project is a function? Is ESLint project is a function? And we'll double check. We'll go and have a look at those functions up top in a moment. ESLint_d can also be a formatter, and we'll format with ESLint_d if it's a ESLint project. Also, we want to format with style.lua. There's no additional configuration we need to provide there. And then Mason null-ls, as I mentioned, it installs these null language server helpers, Prettier D, style.lua, ESLint_d, Deno format. And effectively what I'm saying here is automatic installation means look at what's being configured for null-ls and install those. So if nothing is installed, it will install these for me. Okay, let's go up top and look at each of the functions. So we'll start with isDeno project. IsDeno project, basically check if the root has the deno.json file. If it has that, we assume the project is configured with Deno. Let's look at should format with Prettier. So if it's not a Prettier project, then we don't want to format with Prettier. If it is a Prettier project, then we want to check to see if it's an ESLint project. And if it is an ESLint project, we want to see if it's an ESLint Prettier project. And if it is an ESLint and ESLint Prettier project, then we don't want to format with Prettier. Otherwise, we want to format with Prettier. And so this can get a bit complicated. So let's have a look at what a Prettier project is, which is I think the next one up, is Prettier project. So these ones are a little bit more complicated. I first want to mention that I store a local like module level variable here, so that like every time we open a file in the same project, it shouldn't reassess the project. So the first time you load a file, it will be a little bit slower because it needs to like check whether the root has the file prettier.rc. If you open a new file in the same project, it shouldn't have to do that again. So that's what this is for. And basically that's how we determine if a project is a prettier one. It needs to have the .prettierrc. Now you might mention that Prettier and ESLint and Dano have various different ways to configure their projects. And yes, that is correct. And no, my configuration is not an exhaustive match to all of those things. It's what I've encountered so far, and I'm happy to add more things to it as I may or may not need them. Okay, now we need to look at is ESLint project and is prettier ESLint prettier project. So let's go to the is ESLint project first. Here it is here, is ESLint project. Again, we're caching the result so we don't have to reassess it every time. So if we already have the result, just return it. Otherwise, check if the root has .eslint.rc or .eslint.rc JSON. If it does, cache the result and return true. If it doesn't have those files, there is another way to configure ESLint, and that is inside the package JSON. So let's check to see if we have a package JSON. If we do, then we need to read the package JSON, and we need to check to see if inside the package JSON there is a string ESLint config. And if there is, then we consider it to be an ESLint project. So this is a bit more of a complicated. And then if we go down to if is an ESLint prettier project, it's very similar. We skip the whether it's an ESLint project and we just check the package JSON. We read the file and look inside that file to see if there is any mention of ESLint plugin prettier. If there is a mention of ESLint plugin prettier inside the package JSON, then we assume it's a ESLint prettier project. There we go. That's how we decide whether null-ls sources should apply to those files. Okay, so that was null-ls. Lspsaga is here. So we already saw the Lspsaga stuff above. This particular one is, it has an init function as well. So we saw attaching key maps to buffers. So if a buffer is an LSP buffer, we'll attach the Lspsaga key maps, which was this function here. We'll attach those key maps to the buffer. But one thing we also need to do for LSP is actually call the setup function. Okay, moving down, now we're at completion plugins. So nvim-comp is the completion plugin that I've chosen. I've added all of these other dependencies. So this one connects to LSP. This one gives us sources from buffer text. LSP kind. Oh, this tells us inside the suggestions where, if it's an LSP one, it tells us which LSP is providing it. I think that's what it does. And then lua snip for snippet and comp lua snips for snippet configuration. So let's have a look at the completion init file. Again, this is another longish file. Protected calls at the top, and then we call comp, we call setup with all of these settings. And to be honest, I don't know exactly what all of them do, but they are, I guess this setup is provided on the nvim-comp docs. This is giving us the ability to format things with LSP kind. Yeah, so it tells us whether the completion suggestion comes from the buffer or from LSP. Some mappings to allow us to execute completion things while we're, I guess, being offered completion suggestions. So if I like start typing here map, right, it's suggesting mapping, which is a property that's being suggested by the LSP, but also attach underscore mappings with a prompt buff number is a function that's being suggested by the LSP. There's a different implementation of the attached mappings, so on and so forth, right? There's more and more, and so I can use Control N to show them, like, to select the next item in the list, Control P to go previous item in the list, Control Space to, well, Control Space should be complete, but because we've started selecting items, it's a bit different. So like here we have map and it's suggesting mapping. So if I Control Space, wait, why is it not working? Pretty sure Control Space is supposed to complete that. Control Space is set to mapping complete. I don't know why it's not applying it. But you can do just enter completes, you know, the currently selected mapping. Control E will abort, so it closes the suggestion list and just lets you keep typing. And then, yeah, carriage return is confirm. Oh, confirm select equals true will select the item. I'm unsure why complete is not working, and I need to look into that. Snippet configuration, so use lua snip for snippets. I don't actually have any snippets configured, so this is how it sorts them. So I believe I just copied this from the nvim-comp thing. I don't know if I want something different here. That's probably something to look into. Different sources for completion, so LSP and lua snip, then the buffer. What it looks like basically is what window is. And so that is completion. Then we have nvim-tree, so this is the tree view as I mentioned before. I use nvim-tree. Let's have a look at the config. Default width of the tree is 60. I want to show diagnostics results in the tree. I want to not display the .git folder. So if you, actually we're not in a location where there is a .git folder, but I don't want the .git folder, so I've just filtered it out completely. Centralized selection will ensure that the current file, so if we actually look down here at leader E, key map leader E is to nvim-tree find file toggle. This basically opens the nvim-tree with the current file selected. Centralized selection makes sure that it's in the center, or like vertically center. Side equals right. I like my file tree on the right hand side so it doesn't push the code around when you open it and close it. Default width is 60 characters. Indent markers is these lines here. That's basically that. And then I have some key maps for use with the tree. So leader E to open and close. When it's open, I can do control 7 to set it to 100 characters. Control 6 to set it to the default, which is 60. Control 8 to make it 5 characters wider. Control 9 to make it 5 characters skinnier. That's nvim-tree. Okay, next thing I have is the Primogens Harpoon plugin. This is for file navigation, so you can mark locations within a file and then easily jump to and from them. I'm still learning how to use this in a more efficient way. Telescope. So Telescope is a fuzzy finder plugin, so I can press Control P and then like search for buffers, for example, and then I find these. This is finding files in my project. Now Telescope provides a whole heap of other built-in finders, and I use some of them and I don't use others. I would suggest looking into Telescope to find out which ones you would like to use. It depends on pop-up nvim, plenary nvim, and I'm also using the FZF native extension. So let's go into the init function to see what configuration I have. So first of all, I have these key maps set. So as I mentioned, Control P to bring up find files. So these are all running commands. So it runs telescope space find files. And then we have leader DL to show the diagnostics. No diagnostics in the project currently, but what if we just do a boo-boo there and we do leader DL. Now we see we've got a list of diagnostics in the project. FB for file browser. So because I've removed netrw, maybe the file browser is not. I don't use this one very often because I usually use the nvim-tree. FG for git files, so this will be like a find files, but only files that are related to git. help tags. So if you want to like look up help for Editorconfig, then you can do that. You can actually see a preview on the right hand side. Grep string, so grep string will look for the string that you're currently cursor over. So I'm on key map, right? So if I do leader fs, yeah, so find word key map, and it's looking for that word in my whole project. And I think we can then type, yeah, we can type other things to find, like maybe we wanted buffer key map. So now it's finding buffer in the list of items that have key map in them. Leader lb shows us a list of all the buffers that are currently open. So you can see I've got 4 buffers, 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're just listed there. Live grep is a way to search for, you know, for a string in your project, which is not the grep string. So if you just want to search for a string, but it's not one that you're on. Telescope resume, tr, brings up the previous telescope window, and with the results already loaded and your prompt already loaded. And then I have my own custom one, live grep with globs, and I've attached that to leader ff. So leader ff. So now I can actually filter down. Maybe I want to look into only .md files. Actually, I think I might need to do */*star.md space, and then, yep. So this now matches the file name and path, and then after 2 spaces is the text that we're searching for, right? So I'm looking for to do, and we can see that it goes down to just this one match. So that is telescope live grep with globs, which is a command that I've created myself further down. Telescope action set, and that's a module from Telescope that we'll use later. Fix folds. Forget why I grabbed this, but basically when you have folds set up, it screws with Telescope. I don't remember why. So basically, in all of the built-ins, I kind of like add extra config to them, the fix folds. Find files, I want to use ripgrep, and I want these arguments. If I want to include hidden files, I add the -- hidden. Basically, I'm trying to apply the fix folds to all the other things. Yep, so telescope.setup. So these are the default setups that I want to apply to my telescope. I think, yeah, I don't need to go over all of the options, but basically you can see, you know, some of them start with the preview at 40 characters and take up 90% of the window. Yeah, what previewers I want to use. So these previewers when opening these different options. FZF, I want to use fuzzy finding. And as I mentioned here, I've got an extension FZF. I also load the Harpoon extension, and I create my own user command for find files including hidden, which calls the built-in telescope find files, but passes in some different config. I don't think I really use this one too much, but actually I do, and we'll come back to that. But I basically use this one instead of the other find files one. Then I have my own custom telescope pickers that I've created with some inspiration from TJ. I do save the config to a temp file, but I probably should be saving this in my like nvim data folder, and I should refactor my plugin config to do that. But basically this is the live grep with globs. Don't really want to go through the details of it, but you can read the code. I showed you before what it does. I also have just a plain custom live grep. We can see the light bulbs, meaning there's a code action. So we can do leader CA on here. Code action, so we can change to parameter 2 or parameter 3, apparently, but I don't want to do that. So I press Q to get out of there. Custom live grep. Right, so the way that I want livegrep to work is to not be a regex by default. I want it to be just a string by default, unless I put forward slashes on the beginning and end of the string, and then I want it to be a regex. So that's what my custom livegrep does. So that's telescope. Then we've got trouble. I mentioned before about trouble, which is the kind of like bottom panel pop-up. So we have the leader gr to show LSP references. So there's LSP references for in trouble, and then there's also trouble setup, which we need to run to make it work. Editorconfig, so I like using Editorconfig in my projects. So that's where you have a .editorconfig file at the root of your project, and then those settings will, as long as your editor supports it, those I guess settings will be applied to your editor. So in order to make Editorconfig work in Vim, you need to use this plugin. Vim Smoothie for smooth scrolling. Comment.nvim is a plugin that I use to, like, say we want to comment out this whole block. I can press GC, comments out that block. And I forget how to do it on just a single line, but you can do that on just a single line without having to select it. Let's look at the init function. It's just comment.setup, so nothing in there. Autopairs, nvim autopairs basically allows me to, like, if I do open curly brace, you see how it adds a closing curly brace and puts the cursor in the middle. It gives you that, but a whole heap of other things. So that's what Autopairs does. Let's go into there. Check Treesitter and fast wrap is basically the config that I have for Autopairs. Toggleterm, so you can open terminals in Vim, so that's what Toggleterm is doing. Looks like control /. There we go, gives us a terminal. And these are the settings for that, like that pop-up terminal from the bottom. I think I can do control / to open it, control / to close it, and it goes away. And then just some additional key maps. So for example, if I want to get out of the terminal and go up to this buffer, I should be able to press Control K and that works, right? And then Control J takes me back down into the terminal. Control / closes the terminal. I need to use this a bit more. Yep, so basically when a terminal opens, then add these key maps to it is effectively what this is doing here. So that's Toggleterm. Vim-test I haven't been using a lot recently, but this is a way where you can, like, if you're in a test file, you can run a command that executes the test. That's effectively what it does. So yeah, I've added leader TF, and that will run the test file command. Interesting that I put colon there. I think you can just put command. Yeah, and that should run the tests in that file, as long as it's one that's supported by vim-test. I believe I've been doing that in jest files, but I don't remember. nvim-colorizer.lua. So show colors visually. Let's see. Yeah, basically I've just said in TypeScript React files, show the colors for CSS, and I'll show you a TypeScript project in a moment with that. But basically this, let's see if we have like hash 123 ABC. I don't think it's showing it in a, yeah, so it doesn't show it in a Lua file, but if you're in a TypeScript React file, then it will actually show the color that's been defined, and I'll show you that in a moment. We're almost at the bottom of this file. Gitsigns. So as I mentioned, this will show us like if there are changes in the file. So I think that's this little green bar on the left hand side that shows that this line was added. And we get a little red arrow that shows that there was a line deleted. That's what Gitsigns is. Let's go into the config. Oh, there's a whole heap of stuff in here. I probably won't go into the details because this is effectively configuring what it looks like for each of the different signs in the sidebar. But basically, yes, this shows you what a Gitsigns allows you to see what has changed in terms of Git changes in a specific file that you have. Vim-fugitive, I use that plugin for Git integration. And then blamer-nvim is a plugin that I use to see Git blames in line. So I have a key map here for leader BT. If I do leader BT, whoops, we can now see some virtual text here that shows us the most recent change to this line of code, which was me recently. Leader BT to toggle it off again. Okay, so back to the plugins Lua, back to the bottom of the file. So that was blamer init, and that is all of the plugins. So if I jump to this other tab that I have, and we'll just jump into here. This is a TypeScript project that I have, so you can see tsconfig, and I believe it is probably a create React app. I made it a long time ago, but anyway, we'll go into this file here, and we can see that we go down to this function app. We can do ZC, collapse that whole function up, ZX to expand it. We can even, I think we should be able to like collapse. Okay, I've only like configured it to allow 3 levels of collapsing. So whenever there's a little arrow, like a down chevron, that's when you can collapse things. But this line above, we can see it has a little underline and an exclamation warning sign. That means there's a warning on this line. And so this is the integration with ESLint saying this value is defined but never used. This is the integration with the TypeScript language server. It's also telling me that. So it's a bit repeated and I haven't figured out how to make it not do that. So let's see if we define a color, you know, like medium. I don't know if it knows about named colors. Does not know about named colors. But if we do go into a file where we have sidebar, yeah, there we go. So it knows about hex colors. So this is the Colorizer plugin that I mentioned. So we're in a TypeScript file, and let's see, background color, medium sea green. Yeah, it doesn't know about named colors, just knows about hex colors. And yeah, so we can go down to like this snake game provider, and we can do GD. And we do GD. There we go. Go to definition. That's taken us to the definition of this component in React. And we can go to the set visible here and GD on it. Jumps us up to the use state. Yeah, there's lots of LSP integrations for TypeScript and React. Okay, so we're back over here. Let's go to the init. Let's go to this daneharnett init file, right? So we looked at plugins. Let's look at the options. Okay, lots of options. Yeah, I defined some local variables just so that we don't have to type vim dot in the front all the time. Probably not worth it. Don't back up. These are completion options. Expand tabs to spaces, yes. File type, I think that means like try and determine the file type. These are my fold settings, so can see there's the down chevron and the right chevron for the open and closed versions. Max nesting, so I said 3 was my thing before. Yep, I don't super remember off the top of my head what all of these settings do, but there you go. If I have a tab, it looks like a little right triangle. If I have, I don't know what trail is, but spaces are dots and trails are also dots. I wonder if, like, if you have trailing spaces, you can have it be a different character. That would be interesting. Scroll off, so I try to keep, like, as I scroll down, it keeps like 8 lines on the screen at once. Shift width is 2, soft tab stop is 2. Some of these get overridden by the editor config. Do syntax highlighting. I think that's what that means. Anyway, these are my options. I like having the cursor row highlighted like this, and I also like having the cursor column highlighted like that. So, like, when I look at the window, I can easily find where the cursor is. Yep, as you can see, I have relative numbering for line numbers and then absolute for the current. And I also currently use, anytime I yank or delete things, they go into the system clipboard so I can paste them somewhere else. Don't know if I like it, it's what I do. Yank, let's have a look at what that is. Yeah, so one thing that I do is, like, say if I like visually select all of this and my cursor is now at line 14 and I press yank, I want my cursor to stay on line 14. That's what I like, but the default is that it will go back to where the visual selection starts. So I do this in visual mode, remap Y to YGV escape. I don't want this to run, these things to happen in VS Code, so yank into the system clipboard, leader Y. I think that other setting that I was using makes this a moot point, but I've got leader Y, so that specifically goes into the system clipboard. Let's go to arrow keys. I made them all no ops. This was more of a like a training wheel for me to try and not use the arrow keys. Could probably not do that anymore. Oops, I closed the wrong window. This one here. What is the editing options that I have? Okay, in normal mode, move text up and down. Okay, so we can press Alt J and K, which will take the current line and move it up a line or down a line. In visual mode, stay in indent. Okay, yeah, so I can, like, if I do shift, oh, not shift, but if I do like right angle bracket, it indents, and left angle bracket, it de-indents. Move text up and down in visual mode. So this is like if I select things, move them around. And then if I select something and then paste, it does _DP, which I don't remember what that does. I'm guessing it's going to paste over the top, maybe. And then in visual block mode, we can do these things. And I forget what they do, and I don't really use visual block mode that much. So yeah, buffers, copy relative path. So one thing that I like to do quite often is, like, if I'm editing, say, this file here, and I want to know, I want to know this file, so I can do, like, run this command, copy relative path, and we can see it says copied uses daneconfig nvim-lua daneharnett init.lua to the clipboard. And then I can go to, like, Slack, where I need to paste it to someone that I'm talking to about this file or whatever. So that was buffers. Yep, I moved that back here, as I mentioned before. Navigation. Interesting, I'm pretty sure we had this in somewhere else, so I've got this twice. Good thing that we went through this line by line. I'm finding a lot of things to improve here. I like using Control H, J, K, and L to like to jump between different thingies. So like say I open this one in a visual split, it's Shift V, nope, it's Control V, there we go. So now I have a split windows and I want to go, my cursor is here and I want to go over to the right hand one. I press Control L, which is the like cursor right, cursor left. Control H takes me back to the left. That's what these ones do. Better window navigation, resize with arrows. This is to change the size of things, and then Shift L and Shift H will, if you remember the buffers at the top here, Shift L, oops, Shift H moves to the one to the left. Shift L moves to the one to the right. So if I just have like a couple of tabs open, I Shift L and H between them. It runs B next or buffer next and B previous and buffer previous. Last one is command palette, and this is a bit more of a complicated thing. This is, let's go to the bottom of the thing. So I've got this function open command palette and it uses pickers. So where is pickers defined? It's defined up here. It's a telescope thing. So this is my integration with telescope. So I'm saying create a new picker with these options. Make the title command palette. Here's how you like find the things. Here's how to sort them. Here's how to like when a user like clicks on something or does something, do this thing. And basically the main part is these lines right here. So vim schedule, basically like outside of the loop, if the command is a function, then call that function. Otherwise, assume it's a vim command and call vim.command with the command name. So what are commands? Oh, and actually right at the bottom of the line, you can see leader CP calls the open command palette, which is this function. So let's have a look at leader CP. So space CP, it brings open this telescope window. These are all of the commands that are available. And so we can type find, or we can like Control P to navigate previous, Control N to navigate next. And so what I've done is I've defined at the top of this file a table of commands. Basically the title, find in project, and then the command to run. So some of these are my custom ones, and I've done this because I don't often remember the key maps for things. So instead of remembering all key maps, I can do leader CP, and then, you know, oh, I remember I want to do grep, so I just type grep in there and it comes up with the command that I want to run. Press enter, and that takes me back to the live grep with globs telescope window. So these are all of the commands that are defined. Find in project, so I want to look for any string inside the whole project. Let's just search for Harpoon. So we can see there's a mention of Harpoon in lazy lock, plugins Lua, command palette, and telescope Lua. So that's find in project. And then I've got find files including hidden, live grep with globs, LSP references, which is opens. There's probably no LSP references to be. Actually, we can do it here. You need to be, for LSP references, you need to be on a word. Yeah. And so there's only one reference to the commands table right here. So it just jumped me straight down to that. Go back up to top. Toggle terminal, so bring up that terminal from the bottom, which is I think the command / is probably easier, and I kind of remember that one a bit more. Show me the git changed files. So there we go. I've got some changes in each of these files that I probably, okay, so these two I want to keep, and these ones I've accidentally changed as we've been walking through. Git commit history, there you go. There's the commit history that we can easily browse. List diagnostics for the whole workspace. No diagnostics found, so that's not going to do anything, and current file's not going to do anything. Harpoon, mark, add file, and then open mark. So let's say we've got this plugins file here, and we're going to add a mark to Harpoon, like that. And then we'll go over to command palette, and we'll do the same thing. Harpoon, mark, add file. Then I do leader CP and do open marks in Telescope. It's showing me the marks that I've saved in Harpoon. And basically we can easily switch between them by doing that. So if you have like a couple of files that you often jump between, you can use Telescope to do that. Blamer toggle, so I showed you the Blamer plugin. This is just a Telescope version of the leader BT key map. Resume the last cached Telescope picker, that's leader TR, and then LSP rename. So say we want to change the name of commands, I can do leader CP to bring up the command palette, and then I can start typing rename. It selects the one that for some reason it knows that I want to do that. Hit enter, and then you can see down the bottom here, it's asking me what I want the command to be, and maybe I say commands list. Hit enter, and that changed the name of the variable there, and it would have changed it down here as well. And let's undo that. That is the end of my Neovim configuration. So just want to say thanks everyone for watching. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them down in the comment section below. If you like this video, please leave it a like. If you want to see more of this kind of content from me, consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.